There comes a moment when you begin to feel that some doors are closing, arriving silently without warning. Not because someone told you they were closing. Not because you tried and failed. But because, at some point along the way, you accepted that time had decided for you. This feeling doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly, with small concessions. A thought dismissed. An interest set aside. A possibility you stop considering because it seems inconsistent with your current situation. And over time, these small moments turn into something bigger, a belief that your life has already been shaped and that all that's left is to live within that shape. But this belief is not based on facts. It is based on interpretations. And interpretations can change. Hello and welcome to the Private Audiobooks channel. The topic of this audiobook video is how to reinvent yourself at any age. Before moving on to the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. On this channel, I regularly share audiobook videos that take you to the next level. If you're ready, let's get started. Chapter 1: Understanding Reinvention Beyond Age. Age, as a concept, functions more as a mental framework than a biological reality. It becomes a way of organizing time, of deciding what is reasonable and what is not. When you consider trying something new, you may begin to notice that your first thought is not about the thing itself, but whether it is appropriate for your age. Whether it makes sense. Whether others will find it strange. This is not a conscious process. It happens beneath the surface, in the space between wanting something and allowing yourself to seriously consider it. The mind shows a quiet resistance, not high enough to be called fear, but persistent enough to divert your attention elsewhere. And over time, this resistance becomes familiar. It starts to feel like wisdom. But it is not wisdom. It is caution that has lost its usefulness. The idea that certain things are no longer possible for you is not innate. It is learned. And learned things can be examined. Not to reject them entirely, but to understand where they come from and whether they still serve you. When you were younger, the world felt open in a way that had nothing to do with opportunity. It felt open because you had not yet decided what was impossible. You had not yet built the internal map that divides life into categories, things that are for you, and things that are not. That map was constructed slowly, through experience, through observation, through the quiet accumulation of unspoken rules about what people like you are supposed to do. And now, when you think about reinvention, the map resists. It tells you that this is not the time. That you have already made your choices. That starting something unfamiliar would be inefficient, or foolish, or too far outside the pattern you have established. But the map is not the territory. It is only one way of seeing. There is a difference between responding to real limitations and responding to imagined ones. Real limitations are external. They involve resources, time, physical capacity, actual consequences. Imagined limitations are internal. They involve what you believe is appropriate, what you believe is too late, what you believe others would think. And most of what stops you is imagined. This does not mean the feelings are not real. They are. But feelings are not facts. They are signals, and signals can be misinterpreted. The discomfort you feel when you consider doing something unfamiliar is not proof that you should not do it. It is only proof that it is unfamiliar. Over time, it becomes clear that the resistance you feel is not about age. It is about identity. It is about the story you have been telling yourself about who you are, and what belongs in that story. And when something does not fit the story, the mind reacts. Not because the thing is wrong, but because it threatens coherence. You have spent years building a sense of self that feels stable. And stability is valuable. But stability can also become rigidity. And rigidity, over time, can feel like safety when it is actually limitation. Reinvention does not mean abandoning what you have built. It does not mean pretending you are someone you are not, or erasing the years you have lived. It means recognizing that the self is not fixed. That who you are is not a final answer, but an ongoing process. And that process does not stop simply because time has passed. There is a common belief that life moves in stages, and that each stage has its purpose. That in youth, you explore. In middle age, you establish. And later, you maintain. This framework is not without value. It reflects something real about how energy and responsibility shift over time. But it also creates a problem. It suggests that after a certain point, the work of becoming is finished. That you have arrived at who you are, and that what remains is simply to live out that identity until it ends. And this suggestion, though rarely stated explicitly, shapes how you think about change. When you hear about someone making a significant shift later in life, the reaction is often surprise. Not because the shift is impossible, but because it violates the expected sequence. It feels like something that should have happened earlier, or not at all. And this reaction reveals the underlying assumption that life is supposed to follow a certain order, and that deviating from that order requires explanation. But this order is cultural, not natural. It is a pattern that has been reinforced through repetition, not because it is the only way, but because it is the most common way. And the most common way becomes the expected way. And the expected way becomes the right way. And the right way becomes the only way that feels safe. But safety, in this context, is not protection. It is confinement. The mind resists change not because change is dangerous, but because change is unpredictable. And unpredictability feels like risk. So the mind offers reasons. It tells you that you are too old to start over. That you lack the energy you once had. That others who are younger have an advantage you cannot overcome. That your responsibilities make exploration impractical. And some of these reasons may be true, in part. But they are rarely as absolute as they feel. What the mind is actually protecting is not your well-being. It is your sense of consistency. Because if you can change now, it raises a question: why didn't you change before? And that question is uncomfortable. It suggests that the life you have been living may not have been inevitable. That there were other paths. That you made choices, and that those choices were not forced upon you by time, but by belief. And belief is harder to confront than circumstance. This is often where people lose control, without realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they are trying to avoid discomfort. And the easiest way to avoid discomfort is to stop asking the questions that produce it. To accept the limits that have been placed on you, internally or externally, and to call that acceptance maturity. But maturity is not the same as resignation. Maturity involves understanding what is real and what is interpretation. It involves knowing the difference between a boundary and a habit. And it involves being willing to test the habits that have begun to feel like boundaries. When you think about reinvention, the word itself may feel too large. It carries a weight that suggests something dramatic, something that requires dismantling your entire life and starting from nothing. And if that is what reinvention means, then it is easy to dismiss. Because that kind of change feels impractical, or irresponsible, or incompatible with the life you have built. But reinvention does not have to mean that. It can mean something quieter. Something more precise. It can mean shifting direction, not erasing the past. It can mean adding something new, not removing what is already there. It can mean reconsidering a decision that no longer fits, without calling it a mistake. This is not about starting over. It is about continuing forward with more clarity. The phrase starting over suggests that what came before was wasted. That the years you have lived were steps in the wrong direction, and that real progress requires going back to some earlier point and choosing differently. But this is not how change works. You cannot go back. And you do not need to. Everything you have experienced has shaped you. The skills you have developed, the patterns you have learned, the failures you have survived, they are not obstacles to change. They are resources. And when you approach reinvention not as erasure, but as redirection, you begin to see that what felt like limitation is often preparation. You may begin to notice that the resistance to change is not evenly distributed. There are some areas of your life where you feel flexible, open to adjustment, willing to experiment. And there are other areas where the resistance is immediate and total. Where even the thought of doing something differently feels wrong. This unevenness reveals something. It shows you where your identity is most tightly held. Where the story you tell about yourself is most rigid. And where that rigidity exists, there is often something worth examining. Not because rigidity is always bad, but because it is rarely chosen consciously. It develops as a response to something. Failure, criticism, uncertainty, fear. And once it develops, it becomes invisible. It feels like truth, not protection. And because it feels like truth, it is rarely questioned. But reinvention begins with questioning. Not aggressive questioning, not the kind that demands immediate answers. But quiet questioning. The kind that asks, is this still true? Does this still fit? Is this serving me, or am I serving it? These questions do not require dramatic action. They require attention. And attention, over time, creates space. Space to notice what you have been avoiding. Space to consider what you have been dismissing. Space to imagine what might be possible if you stopped assuming the map you have been using is the only map available. The belief that you are too late is not a reflection of reality. It is a reflection of how you have been taught to think about time. In most contexts, time is treated as linear and irreversible. What is done is done. What is missed is missed. And while this is true in certain literal ways, you cannot relive a specific moment, you cannot undo a specific choice, it is not true in the way it is often applied. People speak of windows closing, as if life were a series of opportunities that appear once and then disappear forever. And in some cases, this is accurate. There are things that require youth, or health, or circumstances that no longer exist. But most of what people call a closed window is not closed. It is simply harder to see from where they are standing now. The difficulty is real. But difficulty is not impossibility. When someone tells you that you have missed your chance, what they are often saying is that you have missed the easiest path. And they are right. The easiest path is usually the one taken early, when fewer responsibilities exist, when failure carries less weight, when experimentation feels natural. But the easiest path is not the only path. There are people who learn new languages in their 60s. Who start businesses in their 50s. Who return to creative work they abandoned decades ago. Who train their bodies in ways they never thought possible. Who leave careers that no longer fit and build something unfamiliar. These people are not exceptional in the sense that they possess some rare quality. They are exceptional in the sense that they stopped listening to the voice that told them it was too late. And that voice is loud. It is persuasive. It sounds like reason. It sounds like practicality. It sounds like care. But it is not care. It is fear pretending to be wisdom. Fear says, you will fail. Fear says, others will judge you. Fear says, you do not have what it takes. And fear is not always wrong. You might fail. Others might judge you. You might lack certain skills or resources. But these possibilities are not reasons to stop. They are simply conditions to navigate. The difference between someone who changes and someone who does not is not courage. It is permission. At some point, you have to give yourself permission to try, even when it feels awkward, even when it does not fit the image you have carried, even when the outcome is uncertain. And this permission does not come from confidence. It comes from willingness. Willingness to be uncomfortable. Willingness to be a beginner again. Willingness to let go of the idea that you should already know how to do this. There is a phrase people use when they talk about age, I'm too old for this. It is said casually, often with humor, but it reflects something deeper. It reflects a belief that certain behaviors, certain pursuits, certain forms of engagement belong to a specific phase of life. And once that phase has passed, continuing them becomes inappropriate. But inappropriate according to whom? According to what standard? According to what actual consequence? Most of the time, the answer is, according to nothing specific. Just a vague sense that this is how things are supposed to be. And that vague sense is powerful, because it does not require evidence. It simply exists as background noise, shaping decisions without being noticed. Over time, it becomes clear that much of what you think of as personal preference is actually internalized expectation. You are not choosing what feels right to you. You are choosing what feels acceptable. And acceptability is a moving target, shaped by culture, by comparison, by the unspoken rules of whatever group you belong to. But acceptability is not the same as meaning. And at a certain point, you may begin to realize that the life you have built around acceptability is not the life you actually want. This realization does not always arrive dramatically. It can arrive as a quiet dissatisfaction. A sense that something is missing, though you cannot name what it is. A feeling that you are going through motions, fulfilling obligations, but not moving toward anything that matters to you personally. And when that feeling arises, the instinct is often to dismiss it. To call it restlessness, or selfishness, or midlife confusion. To tell yourself that everyone feels this way sometimes, and that the feeling will pass if you ignore it. But the feeling does not pass. It shifts. It becomes resignation. And resignation, over time, becomes a kind of numbness. You stop asking what you want, because asking feels pointless. You stop imagining alternatives, because imagining them only makes the present feel heavier. This is where many people remain. Not because they lack options, but because they have stopped believing that options exist. Reinvention is not about finding a perfect answer. It is about refusing to accept that no answer is possible. It is about recognizing that the life you are living is not finished, even if it feels complete. That there is still room to adjust, to explore, to reconsider. That age is not a wall, but a point on a continuum. And that continuum does not end until you do. The psychological root of I'm too late is not time. It is comparison. You see where others are. You see what they have accomplished. You see how much further along they are than you. And the gap feels insurmountable. But this comparison is flawed. Because you are not comparing your beginning to their beginning. You are comparing your beginning to their middle, or their end. You are looking at what they have built over years, and measuring it against what you have not yet started. And this comparison is not useful. It does not motivate. It does not clarify. It only discourages. What is useful is to measure yourself against yourself. To ask, am I closer to what I want now than I was a year ago? Am I learning? Am I moving? Am I willing to continue, even when progress is slow? These are the only comparisons that matter. Because these are the only comparisons you can control. There is no such thing as being too late in an absolute sense. There is only being later than you imagined you would be. And that gap between where you thought you would be and where you are is not a failure. It is simply information. It tells you that your expectations were based on a timeline that was never guaranteed. But now is still now. And now is when you can begin. Chapter 2: Letting Go of Old Versions of Yourself. There comes a time when you begin to notice that the person you have been is not quite the person you are becoming. This awareness does not arrive with clarity. It arrives as a subtle discomfort, a sense that something no longer fits the way it once did. You may find yourself going through familiar routines, speaking in familiar ways, making familiar choices, and yet feeling a growing distance between the actions and the person performing them. This distance is not a problem to be solved immediately. It is a signal. It suggests that something within you has shifted, even if you have not yet named what that shift is. And the instinct, when this happens, is often to ignore it. To tell yourself that this feeling is temporary, that it will pass, that you are simply tired or stressed or going through a phase. But the feeling does not pass. It deepens. And eventually, you are faced with a quiet realization that the identity you have been carrying, the version of yourself you have presented to the world and to yourself, may no longer reflect who you actually are. This is not a failure. It is not a sign that you have been living incorrectly, or that the years behind you were wasted. It is simply the nature of being alive over time. People change. Circumstances change. What mattered 5 years ago may not matter now. What felt essential then may feel hollow now. And the version of yourself that was built around those old priorities begins to feel like a costume you are still wearing, even though it no longer fits. But letting go of that version is not easy. Because that version is not just an image. It is a structure. It is the way you have organized your sense of self, the way you make decisions, the way you relate to others. It is woven into your daily life, into your relationships, into your expectations of what you should be doing and how you should be spending your time. And when you begin to question that structure, it can feel destabilizing. Because if you are not the person you thought you were, then who are you? And if the things you thought defined you no longer define you, then what does? These questions do not have immediate answers. And the discomfort they produce is often enough to make you stop asking them. To retreat back into the familiar, even when the familiar no longer feels right. Because the familiar, at least, is known. And the known, even when it is uncomfortable, feels safer than the unknown. But safety is not the same as growth. And at a certain point, you may begin to realize that the cost of staying the same is greater than the cost of changing. Identity is not a fixed thing. It is a story you tell yourself about who you are. And like any story, it is constructed from selected details. You emphasize certain traits, certain experiences, certain values. You downplay others. And over time, this selective emphasis becomes the narrative you live by. The problem is that this narrative, once established, begins to govern your choices. It tells you what is consistent with who you are, and what is not. It tells you what you would do, and what you would never do. And in doing so, it narrows the range of possibilities you are willing to consider. You may begin to notice that when you think about doing something unfamiliar, the first question that arises is not whether you want to do it, but whether it fits with who you have been. Whether it makes sense given your history. Whether it would seem strange to the people who know you. And this question, though it feels like a reasonable checkpoint, is actually a limit. Because it assumes that who you have been is who you must continue to be. That the choices you made in the past are binding agreements about the future. That consistency is more important than authenticity. But consistency, taken too far, becomes confinement. It becomes a refusal to update. A refusal to acknowledge that the person you were when you made certain choices may not be the person you are now. There is a difference between honoring your past and being imprisoned by it. Honoring your past means recognizing what you have learned, what you have built, what has shaped you. Being imprisoned by it means believing that because you have always been a certain way, you must always remain that way. And many people, without realizing it, live in that prison. They make choices not based on what they want now, but based on what would be consistent with the person they have presented themselves as. They maintain relationships that no longer feel meaningful because leaving would require admitting that something has changed. They stay in careers that no longer interest them because shifting would require explaining why they spent so many years in a direction they are now abandoning. And the cost of this consistency is subtle. It is not a dramatic suffering. It is a slow erosion of vitality. A sense that you are performing your life rather than living it. That you are maintaining an image rather than following what actually matters to you. Over time, it becomes clear that much of what you think of as yourself is actually a collection of old decisions that have calcified into identity. Decisions about what kind of person you are. What you care about. What you are good at. What you are not good at. What is worth your time? What is beneath you? What is too difficult? What is not for people like you? And these decisions, when they were first made, may have been accurate. They may have reflected something real about who you were at that time. But time has passed. And the conditions that made those decisions sensible may no longer exist. But the decisions remain. They remain as assumptions. As unexamined beliefs. As automatic filters that shape what you allow yourself to want, to try, to imagine. And until you examine them, they continue to operate invisibly, narrowing your life without your consent. This is often where people lose control, without realizing it. Not because they are incapable of change, but because they have stopped questioning the framework they are operating within. They believe they are making free choices, but the choices are all happening within a structure they built years ago, under different circumstances, with different information, as a different version of themselves. And that version is still running the show. Letting go of old versions of yourself does not mean rejecting everything you have been. It means recognizing that identity is not a monument. It is not something you build once and then maintain forever. It is something that evolves, or at least it should evolve, in response to who you are becoming. But evolution requires letting go. And letting go requires acknowledging that something is no longer serving you. That a part of how you have been living, or thinking, or defining yourself, has become a limitation rather than a foundation. This acknowledgement is uncomfortable. Because it suggests that you have been holding on to something that was not necessary. That you have been carrying weight you did not need to carry. And if you have been carrying it for years, that raises a question: why? Why did you not see this sooner? Why did you not change when it first became clear that something was off? And the answer, most of the time, is not that you were incapable. It is that you were invested. Invested in the story you had been telling. Invested in the image you had been projecting. Invested in the belief that who you are is supposed to be stable, coherent, consistent over time. But stability, when it becomes rigidity, is not strength. It is fragility. Because it cannot adapt. And anything that cannot adapt eventually breaks. The version of yourself that you built in your 20s was built for the life you were living then. The priorities you had then. The fears you had then. The understanding you had then. And that version may have served you well. It may have helped you navigate uncertainty, establish yourself, build something solid. But you are not in your 20s anymore. And the life you are living now is not the life you were living then. The priorities have shifted. The fears have changed. The understanding has deepened. And the version of yourself that was built for that earlier time may no longer be adequate for this time. This does not mean it was wrong. It means it is outdated. And there is a difference. Outdated does not mean useless. It means it has reached the limit of its usefulness. That it is taking you as far as it can take you, and that continuing to rely on it will only prevent you from moving forward. You may begin to notice that certain aspects of your identity feel more like obligations than expressions. That you are maintaining them not because they feel true, but because you have maintained them for so long that letting them go would feel like a betrayal. A betrayal of the time you have invested. A betrayal of the people who have known you as this version. A betrayal of the younger self who built this identity in the first place. But this is not betrayal. It is growth. And growth always involves leaving something behind. The difficulty is that what you are leaving behind is not just an idea. It is a set of behaviors. A set of relationships. A set of expectations. And all of these are interconnected. When you begin to question one aspect of your identity, the other aspects start to shift as well. And this can feel chaotic. It can feel like you are dismantling something that was stable, something that was working, even if it was not entirely satisfying. And the people around you may reinforce this feeling. They may react with confusion, or concern, or disapproval. Not because they want to harm you, but because your change disrupts their understanding of who you are. And their understanding of who you are is part of how they understand themselves, and the relationship they have with you. So when you change, it creates discomfort not just for you, but for them. And that discomfort can manifest as resistance. As subtle or not so subtle pressure to return to the version of yourself they are familiar with. The version that fits the role they expect you to play. And this pressure is real. It is not imagined. And it can make you doubt whether the shift you are feeling is legitimate, or whether it is just a temporary confusion that you should ignore. But the shift is legitimate. The doubt is the result of external pressure meeting internal uncertainty. And the way to navigate this is not to dismiss the shift, but to examine it more closely. To ask, is this change coming from fear or from clarity? Am I running away from something or moving towards something? These questions do not have simple answers. But they are worth sitting with. Because not all change is growth. Some change is avoidance. Some change is reaction. And it is important to know the difference. Growth feels like alignment. It feels like something falling into place, even if it is unfamiliar. Avoidance feels like escape. It feels like you are trying to get away from discomfort, rather than moving towards something that matters. And the way to tell the difference is to notice what happens after the initial relief. If the change is avoidance, the relief is temporary. The discomfort returns, just in a different form. If the change is growth, the relief deepens. It does not eliminate all discomfort, but it brings a sense of rightness that was not there before. This is not something you can know in advance. You have to move, and then pay attention to what the movement reveals. One of the most difficult aspects of letting go of old versions of yourself is the guilt. The sense that you are abandoning something, or someone, that depended on you being a certain way. That you are letting people down by changing. That you are being selfish by prioritizing what feels right to you over what feels stable to others. This guilt is powerful. It is persuasive. It sounds like responsibility. It sounds like care. But it is not care. It is fear of disapproval dressed up as concern for others. Because the truth is, the people who genuinely care about you do not need you to remain static. They may be confused by your change. They may need time to adjust. But they do not require you to stay the same in order to remain connected to you. And the people who do require that, the people who can only relate to you as long as you conform to a specific role, are not relating to you. They are relating to the function you serve for them. And that is not the same thing. Letting go of the guilt means recognizing that you are not responsible for maintaining other people's comfort at the expense of your own integrity. That your life is not a performance designed to meet the expectations of an audience. That the version of yourself you present to the world should be a reflection of who you are, not a calculation of who others need you to be. This does not mean you disregard others. It does not mean you act without consideration. It means you stop using their potential reactions as the primary factor in your decisions. You take them into account, but you do not let them dictate. And this shift, from external validation to internal alignment, is one of the most significant aspects of letting go. Because as long as you are living for the approval of others, you are not living for yourself. You are living for the version of yourself that you think will be most acceptable. And that version is always a compromise. The labels you have used to define yourself, the roles, the identities, the descriptors, are not neutral. They carry weight. They carry expectation. And once you have claimed a label, it begins to shape how you see yourself and how others see you. Some labels are useful. They provide clarity. They help you communicate who you are and what you care about. But other labels become traps. They lock you into a narrow definition of what is possible for you. They tell you what you can and cannot do. What fits and what does not fit. What is consistent with the label and what violates it. And over time, you may begin to notice that you are making choices not based on what you actually want, but based on what is consistent with the label you have claimed. If you have always thought of yourself as practical, you may dismiss opportunities that feel too uncertain, too creative, too risky, not because they are wrong for you, but because they do not fit the label. If you have always thought of yourself as responsible, you may avoid pursuing something that feels indulgent, even if it would bring you genuine fulfillment. If you have always thought of yourself as independent, you may struggle to ask for help, even when help is necessary. The labels become rules. And the rules become invisible. And before long, you are living according to a set of constraints that you did not consciously choose, but that you enforce automatically because they are part of how you define yourself. Letting go of these labels does not mean you lose your sense of self. It means you stop allowing the labels to make decisions for you. You recognize them as descriptions, not prescriptions. As reflections of who you have been, not mandates for who you must continue to be. And this recognition creates space. Space to try things that do not fit the label. Space to discover aspects of yourself that have been suppressed because they did not align with the identity you were maintaining. You may find that you are more curious than you thought, more creative, more willing to take risks, more interested in things you had dismissed as not for you. And these discoveries do not erase who you were. They expand it. They add dimension. They reveal that the version of yourself you had been holding onto was only one version, and that other versions are possible. The past is not the problem. The problem is identifying too closely with the past. Believing that because you made certain choices, you must continue to defend those choices. That because you invested time in a particular direction, you must continue in that direction, even when it no longer feels right. This is often referred to as the sunk cost fallacy. The belief that because you have already invested something time, energy, money, identity, you must continue investing, or else the initial investment was wasted. But this is not how growth works. The investment was not wasted. It brought you to where you are now. It taught you what you needed to learn. And now that you have learned it, you are free to move on. Continuing simply because you have already started is not commitment. It is inertia. And inertia, over time, becomes a kind of paralysis. You remain in place not because you want to, but because moving feels like admitting that you should have moved sooner. But the best time to change is not 5 years ago. It is now. And the second best time is not next year. It is also now. There is no penalty for updating. There is no cosmic record that marks you down for shifting direction. There is only the life you are living, and the question of whether that life reflects what matters to you now, or what mattered to you then. And if the answer is then, it may be time to let go. Letting go does not require a dramatic gesture. It does not require an announcement, or a clean break, or a complete reinvention. It can be quiet. It can be gradual. It can be as simple as noticing what no longer fits, and giving yourself permission to stop forcing it. You do not have to explain yourself to anyone. You do not have to justify the shift. You do not have to prove that the old version was wrong in order to allow the new version to emerge. You simply have to stop clinging. Stop defending. Stop performing. And allow what is actually true to surface, even if it is different from what was true before. This is not abandonment. It is honoring. Honoring the fact that you are not static. That you are allowed to change. That who you are is not a contract binding you to who you must be. And when you let go of the old version, you do not lose yourself. You find yourself. Not the self you constructed to meet expectations, but the self that exists beneath the construction. The self that has been there all along, waiting for permission to emerge. Chapter 3: Redefining Identity with Intention. Once you have begun to let go of the versions of yourself that no longer serve you, a space opens. It is not an empty space, though it may feel that way at first. It is a space of possibility. A space where something new can take shape, not because you are forcing it, but because you are no longer holding on to what was preventing it from emerging. But this space can also feel uncomfortable. Because without the old definitions, without the familiar labels and roles that provided structure, there is a question that surfaces: if I am not who I was, then who am I now? And this question, though it may seem abstract, is actually quite practical. Because how you answer it will shape the choices you make, the direction you move in, the life you build from this point forward. The instinct, when faced with this question, is often to look outward. To search for external markers of identity. To define yourself by what you do, by what you have achieved, by the roles you occupy, by the recognition you receive. And while these things are not unimportant, they are not the foundation. The foundation is internal. It is the set of values, priorities, and principles that guide how you move through the world. And when identity is built on this foundation, it becomes more stable. Not rigid, but stable. Because it is not dependent on circumstances that can change, or on the approval of others, or on achievements that can be lost. It is dependent on who you choose to be, regardless of what is happening around you. This kind of identity is not something you discover fully formed. It is something you shape, gradually, through attention and intention. Through noticing what feels aligned and what feels misaligned. Through making small adjustments and observing the results. Through asking questions that go deeper than the surface. And one of the most important questions you can ask, at this stage, is not "what do I want," but "who do I want to be?" These questions seem similar, but they point in different directions. What do I want to focuses on outcomes. On goals, achievements, possessions, experiences. It is oriented toward the future, toward the acquisition of something that is currently absent. And while this question has value, it can also be misleading. Because wanting something does not necessarily mean that having it will bring fulfillment. And pursuing what you want without understanding who you want to be can lead you into a life that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow from the inside. Who do I want to be focuses on character. On the qualities you want to embody. On the way you want to move through your days, interact with others, respond to difficulty, make decisions. It is less about what you accumulate and more about how you live. And when you orient yourself around this question, the external outcomes begin to matter less. Not because they are unimportant, but because they are secondary. What matters first is whether you are living in a way that feels true. Whether your actions reflect your values. Whether the person you are becoming is someone you respect. And this alignment, this sense of internal coherence, is what creates fulfillment. Not success. Not recognition. Not even achievement, though achievement may come as a byproduct. Fulfillment comes from living in accordance with what you actually care about, rather than what you have been told to care about. And this distinction is crucial. Because much of what people pursue is not actually theirs. It is inherited. It is absorbed from culture, from family, from comparison, from the ambient pressure to meet certain standards that were never consciously chosen. And when you pursue something that is not actually yours, even if you achieve it, the result is not satisfaction. It is a vague sense of emptiness. A feeling that something is still missing, even though you have done what you were supposed to do. This is why so many people reach the milestones they were aiming for and then feel confused. They thought that reaching the milestone would bring peace, or happiness, or a sense of arrival. But instead, they feel the same as they did before, only now with the added weight of realizing that the thing they spent years working toward did not deliver what they thought it would. And this realization can be destabilizing. Because if the goal was not the answer, then what is? The answer is not another goal. It is a shift in orientation. A shift from external validation to internal alignment. From achievement-based identity to value-based identity. This does not mean you stop setting goals. It does not mean you stop working toward things. It means you stop using goals as the primary measure of your worth. You stop believing that reaching a certain point will finally make you acceptable, or complete, or enough. You recognize that you are already enough. And the work you do, the goals you pursue, the changes you make, they are not about proving yourself. They are about expressing who you are. And when you approach life from this place, the pressure lifts. Not entirely, but significantly. Because you are no longer performing. You are simply living. Identity, when it is intentionally shaped, becomes a kind of compass. It does not tell you exactly where to go, but it tells you which direction feels right. And this is more valuable than a detailed map. Because life does not unfold according to plans. It unfolds according to circumstances, opportunities, challenges, surprises. And if you are trying to follow a rigid map, every deviation feels like a failure. But if you are following a compass, if you have a clear sense of who you want to be, then you can adapt. You can adjust. You can take unexpected paths without feeling lost, because the direction remains consistent even when the terrain changes. This kind of flexibility is not the same as aimlessness. Aimlessness is moving without intention. Flexibility is moving with intention, but without attachment to a specific route. And the way to develop this flexibility is to clarify your values. To identify what actually matters to you, beneath the noise of expectation and comparison. To ask yourself, honestly, what kind of person you want to be, and then to use that clarity as a filter for your decisions. Not every decision will be obvious. Not every choice will feel easy. But when you have a clear sense of your values, the decisions become simpler. Not because the options are fewer, but because the criteria for choosing are clearer. You do not have to weigh every possibility against every other possibility. You simply ask, does this align with who I am trying to be? Does this move me closer to the kind of life I want to live, or further from it? And if the answer is closer, you move toward it. If the answer is further, you move away. And over time, this process of alignment becomes natural. It becomes automatic, not in the sense that you stop thinking, but in the sense that you no longer have to force yourself to make the right choice. The right choice feels obvious, because it is consistent with who you are. But this clarity does not come instantly. It comes through practice. Through trial and error. Through noticing what feels right and what feels wrong, and then adjusting accordingly. You may begin to notice that certain activities leave you feeling energized, while others leave you feeling drained. That certain conversations feel meaningful, while others feel hollow. That certain environments bring out qualities you like in yourself, while others bring out qualities you do not. These observations are data. They are signals pointing you toward what aligns and what does not. And when you pay attention to them, they begin to form a pattern. A pattern that reveals what matters to you, even if you have never articulated it explicitly. And once you see the pattern, you can begin to shape your life around it. Not all at once, but incrementally. Making small adjustments that bring your external life into closer alignment with your internal values. This is not about perfection. It is not about eliminating everything that does not align. That is neither possible nor necessary. It is about increasing the percentage of your life that feels congruent. That feels like it belongs to you, rather than to some version of you that was constructed to meet external expectations. And as that percentage increases, something shifts. The sense of fragmentation decreases. The sense of coherence increases. You begin to feel more integrated, more whole, more like the various parts of your life are working together rather than pulling in different directions. This integration is what people often describe as feeling authentic. But authenticity is not a static state. It is not something you achieve once and then maintain forever. It is an ongoing process of noticing when you are out of alignment and making the adjustments needed to return to alignment. And the adjustments are often small. A conversation redirected. A commitment declined. A boundary set. A habit shifted. These are not dramatic gestures. They are subtle recalibrations. But over time, they accumulate into something significant. The question, who do I want to be, is not a question you answer once. It is a question you return to, again and again, as circumstances change and as you yourself change. Because who you want to be is not fixed. It evolves as you evolve. And the goal is not to arrive at a final answer, but to remain engaged with the question. This engagement keeps you honest. It keeps you from slipping back into autopilot, from defaulting to old patterns simply because they are familiar. It keeps you attuned to whether your life is still reflecting what matters to you, or whether it has drifted away from that without you noticing. And when you notice drift, you do not need to panic. You do not need to overhaul everything. You simply need to make a small correction. To bring yourself back into alignment, one choice at a time. This is the work of intentional identity. It is not a one-time decision. It is a continuous practice. A practice of paying attention, of adjusting, of choosing, of refining. And over time, this practice becomes the foundation of a life that feels true, rather than a life that simply looks acceptable. One of the reasons people struggle with this process is that they are waiting for certainty. They want to know, before they begin, exactly who they should be. Exactly what their values are. Exactly what path will lead to fulfillment. But this certainty does not exist. You cannot know in advance what will feel right. You can only discover it through experience. Through trying things, observing the results, and adjusting accordingly. And this means that some of what you try will not work. Some of the directions you move in will turn out to be dead ends. Some of the identities you experiment with will feel forced, or inauthentic, or simply wrong. And this is not a failure. It is information. It tells you what does not fit, which is just as valuable as knowing what does fit. Because every time you eliminate something that does not align, you narrow the field. You get closer to what does align. But this process requires patience. And patience is difficult, especially when you are eager for change. When you want to feel settled, clear, certain. When you want to move past the discomfort of not knowing and arrive at a place of stability. But stability that is rushed is not true stability. It is premature closure. It is settling on an answer before you have fully explored the question. And when you do this, you often end up back where you started, only with more time lost. True stability comes from allowing the process to unfold at its own pace. From resisting the urge to force clarity before clarity is ready to emerge. From trusting that if you continue to pay attention, if you continue to try things and adjust based on what you learn, the clarity will come. Not all at once, but gradually. And when it comes, it will be real. It will be based on experience, not on speculation. And it will be durable, because it will have been tested. This does not mean you wait passively. It means you engage actively, but without attachment to immediate results. You try things. You notice what happens. You adjust. And you trust that this process, repeated over time, will lead you toward something that feels right. The question, who do I want to be, can feel overwhelming because it seems to demand a comprehensive answer. A complete picture of the ideal self. And when you try to construct that picture, you may find yourself paralyzed. Because the ideal is too far from where you are now. It feels unreachable. And so you do nothing, because anything less than the ideal feels inadequate. But this is not how identity works. You do not become who you want to be all at once. You become who you want to be incrementally, through small choices that are consistent with the direction you are moving. And the direction does not have to be perfect. It just has to be intentional. If you want to be more patient, you do not need to transform into the most patient person in the world overnight. You simply need to make one choice today that is slightly more patient than the choice you would have made yesterday. And then you make another choice tomorrow. And another the day after that. And over time, these small choices accumulate. They build momentum. They reshape your habits, your responses, your sense of what is normal for you. And eventually, the quality you were aiming for becomes part of who you are, not because you forced it, but because you practiced it consistently enough that it became natural. This is how character is built. Not through grand declarations or sudden transformations, but through repetition. Through choosing, again and again, to act in ways that are consistent with who you want to be, even when it is difficult, even when no one is watching, even when the immediate reward is not obvious. And the reward is not always obvious. Often, the reward is delayed. You will not feel different after one patient response. You may not even feel different after 10. But after 100, something shifts. The patience is no longer something you are trying to perform. It is something you have become. And this is true for any quality, any value, any aspect of identity. It is not acquired instantly. It is cultivated over time, through consistent practice. The difficulty is that this process is invisible to others. They do not see the small choices you are making. They do not see the internal work. They only see the results, if they see anything at all. And this can make the process feel thankless. Because you are putting in effort, and no one is acknowledging it. But the acknowledgement is not the point. The point is the person you are becoming. The point is the alignment you are creating between your actions and your values. The point is the sense of integrity that comes from knowing that you are living in a way that feels true, regardless of whether anyone else notices. And when you reach this point, external validation becomes less important. Not because you no longer care what others think, but because their opinion is no longer the primary measure of your worth. You have an internal measure now. A measure based on whether you are being the person you want to be, rather than the person others expect you to be. And this shift, from external validation to internal alignment, is one of the most liberating aspects of intentional identity. Because it frees you from the need to perform, from the need to impress, from the need to constantly prove that you are enough. You know you are enough, not because you are perfect, but because you are trying. Because you are engaged in the process of becoming. And that engagement is enough. Values are not abstract concepts. They are practical tools. They guide decisions. They clarify priorities. They help you determine what is worth your time and what is not. But for values to be useful, they have to be yours. They cannot be borrowed. They cannot be adopted because they sound good, or because they are what you think you should value. They have to be rooted in something real. In something you actually care about. And the way to identify your values is not to think about what you should care about, but to notice what you already care about. To pay attention to the moments when you feel most alive, most engaged, most aligned. And to ask, what is present in those moments that is not present in other moments? It might be connection. It might be creativity. It might be challenge. It might be solitude. It might be contribution. It might be freedom. It might be structure. Whatever it is a clue. A clue to what matters to you. And when you gather enough clues, a pattern emerges. A pattern that reveals your core values. And once you have identified your core values, you can use them as a framework for decision making. When you are faced with a choice, you do not have to agonize over every detail. You simply ask, which option is more consistent with my values? Which option moves me closer to the kind of life I want to live? And the answer, most of the time, will be clear. Not because the choice is easy, but because the criteria are clear. This does not mean every decision will be painless. Some decisions will still require sacrifice. Some decisions will still involve loss. But when you make those decisions in alignment with your values, the loss feels bearable. Because you know why you are making the choice. You know what you are prioritizing. And you are not just reacting. You are choosing. And choosing, even when it is difficult, feels different from being swept along by circumstance. It feels like agency. Like control. Like you are shaping your life, rather than simply enduring it. This sense of agency is one of the most important aspects of intentional identity. Because without it, you are at the mercy of whatever happens to you. You are responding, reacting, adjusting, but you are not directing. You are not steering. But when you have clarity about who you want to be, you become the one steering. Not perfectly. Not without error. But intentionally. And intention, over time, makes a significant difference. Inner alignment is not the same as external success. External success is measured by outcomes. By achievements, recognition, status, wealth. And while these things are not inherently bad, they are also not inherently fulfilling. You can have all the markers of external success and still feel empty. Still feel disconnected. Still feel like something is missing. Because external success does not address the internal question of whether your life reflects what actually matters to you. Inner alignment, on the other hand, is about coherence. It is about whether your actions, your choices, your daily life are consistent with your values. And when they are, there is a sense of rightness that external success cannot provide. This does not mean external success is irrelevant. It means it is secondary. It means that pursuing external success without first establishing inner alignment is a mistake. Because if you achieve external success without inner alignment, you will find that the success does not satisfy you. It does not fill the gap. And you will either keep chasing more success, hoping that the next achievement will finally be enough, or you will burn out, exhausted by the pursuit of something that was never going to deliver what you needed. But if you establish inner alignment first, external success becomes a byproduct. Not a guaranteed byproduct, but a natural one. Because when you are living in alignment with your values, you are more engaged, more focused, more energized. And that energy tends to produce results. But the results are not the goal. The alignment is the goal. And when the alignment is in place, the results, whatever they are, feel like extensions of who you are, rather than measures of your worth. This distinction is subtle, but it is important. Because it changes the relationship you have with success. You are no longer desperate for it. You are no longer defining yourself by it. You are simply doing work that matters to you, and the outcomes, whatever they are welcomed but not needed. And this shift, from needing success to welcoming it, is one of the most powerful aspects of intentional identity. Because it removes the desperation. It removes the pressure. It removes the sense that your worth is on the line every time you try something. You are simply trying. And the trying is enough. Redefining identity with intention is not a quick process. It is not something you do once and then move on from. It is an ongoing practice. A practice of paying attention, of noticing, of adjusting, of choosing. And the practice does not end. Because you do not stop changing. Circumstances change. Priorities shift. What mattered 5 years ago may not matter now. And what matters now may not matter 5 years from now. And this is not a problem. It is simply the nature of being alive over time. You evolve. And your identity evolves with you. The goal is not to arrive at a final version of yourself that requires no further adjustment. The goal is to remain engaged with the process of becoming. To continue asking who you want to be, and to continue making choices that move you closer to that person. Not perfectly. Not without mistakes. But intentionally. And with the understanding that the process itself is the point. You are not trying to reach a destination. You are trying to live in a way that feels true. And that is something you can do right now, regardless of where you are, regardless of what has happened before, regardless of what is yet to come. The person you are becoming is not separate from the person you are now. They are the same person, just moving in a direction you have chosen. And every choice you make that aligns with that direction brings you closer. Not to completion, but to coherence. And coherence is what makes life feel meaningful. Chapter 4: Building a New Direction Step by Step. Once you have clarified who you want to be, the next question becomes, how do you move toward that person? And the answer, though it may seem anticlimactic, is not through dramatic change. It is through small, deliberate adjustments. Through choices that are so subtle they might seem insignificant in the moment, but that accumulate over time into something substantial. This is not the kind of transformation that announces itself. It is not the kind that requires a grand declaration or a sudden break from everything you have known. It is quieter than that. More controlled. And in many ways, more sustainable. Because dramatic change, though it can feel powerful in the beginning, often does not last. The initial momentum fades. The novelty wears off. And what remains is the same person, in the same patterns, only now with the added weight of having tried and failed to transform all at once. But small change, repeated consistently, does not fade in the same way. It builds. It reinforces itself. And over time, it becomes the foundation of a life that looks nothing like the life you were living before, even though no single moment felt like a breaking point. This is the nature of intentional transformation. It is not sudden. It is gradual. And it requires patience, but it also requires something else: trust. Trust that the small choices you are making now will add up to something meaningful later. Trust that you do not need to see the entire path in order to take the first step. And this trust is not easy. Because the small choices do not feel significant. They do not feel like they are moving you anywhere. And when you look around after a week or a month, you may not see any visible change. And the temptation, at that point, is to conclude that what you are doing is not working. That you need to do something bigger, something more dramatic, something that will produce immediate results. But this temptation is a trap. Because it pulls you away from the process that actually works and pushes you toward the process that feels like it works, but that ultimately collapses under its own weight. The process that works is slower. It is less exciting. It does not produce the kind of stories that people tell about transformation. But it is also the process that lasts. And lasting is more important than starting. You may begin to notice that the most significant changes in your life did not happen suddenly. They happened slowly, through the accumulation of small decisions that seemed inconsequential at the time. A habit that you picked up without thinking. A relationship that deepened through repeated small interactions. A skill that you developed through consistent practice, even when the progress was not visible. And when you look back, you can see the arc. You can see how those small moments added up to something larger. But while you were in them, they did not feel like progress. They felt like nothing. Like you were simply going through the motions, without any clear sense that you were moving toward anything. This is the difficulty of the process. It requires you to act without immediate evidence that the action is working. It requires you to trust the accumulation, even when you cannot yet see what is accumulating. And this is where many people give up. Not because they lack the ability to change, but because they lack the patience to let the change unfold at its own pace. They want to see results now. They want to feel different now. And when they do not, they conclude that the process is not working, and they abandon it. But the process is working. It is just working slowly. And slow is not the same as ineffective. It is simply a different timeline than the one you were hoping for. The idea of a sudden break, a dramatic rupture from the past, is appealing because it creates a clear before and after. It allows you to mark a moment and say, this is when everything changed. And there is something satisfying about that clarity. Something that feels decisive, powerful, final. But in practice, sudden breaks are rarely sustainable. Because they do not address the underlying patterns that created the situation you are trying to escape. They simply create distance from that situation. And distance, without deeper change, is temporary. Eventually, the patterns reassert themselves. The old habits return. The old ways of thinking resurface. And you find yourself back where you started, only now with the added frustration of having tried to escape and failed. This is not because you are weak. It is because the break was too sudden. It did not allow time for the new patterns to take root. It did not allow time for your nervous system to adjust to the new way of being. It did not allow time for the identity shift to become integrated. And so the old identity, which is still familiar, which is still wired into your daily life, pulls you back. Not because it is better, but because it is easier. Because it requires less effort. Because it is what your body and mind recognize as normal. Controlled transitions, on the other hand, do not create the same kind of dramatic rupture. But they also do not create the same kind of backslide. Because they work with your existing patterns, rather than against them. They introduce change gradually, in a way that allows your nervous system to adapt. In a way that allows the new identity to become familiar before the old identity is fully released. This does not mean the process is easy. It means it is manageable. It means you are not asking yourself to become a completely different person overnight. You are asking yourself to make one small shift, and then another, and then another. And each shift, on its own, is not overwhelming. It is just a slight adjustment. A small recalibration. But over time, these adjustments accumulate. And the person you become through this process is not someone who suddenly appeared. It is someone who gradually emerged, through consistent choices that were aligned with the direction you wanted to move. And because the emergence was gradual, it is stable. It is not a performance that you have to maintain through force of will. It is simply who you have become, through practice. Behavior is not separate from identity. It is the expression of identity. And when you change your behavior, even in small ways, you are not just changing what you do. You are changing how you see yourself. This is why small behavior changes are so powerful. Not because they produce immediate external results, but because they produce immediate internal shifts. They create evidence. Evidence that you are the kind of person who does this thing. Who makes this choice? Who follows through in this way? And the more evidence you create, the more the identity solidifies. The more it becomes real, not as an aspiration, but as a fact. As something you can point to and say, this is who I am. Not because I want to be this person, but because I have been acting as this person, consistently, over time. And this shift, from wanting to being, is one of the most significant aspects of identity change. Because as long as the identity is something you want, it is external to you. It is something you are reaching for, something you are trying to become. But once it becomes something you are, it is internal. It is integrated. And it no longer requires effort to maintain, because it is simply how you operate now. This is not to say that the behavior becomes effortless. Some behaviors will always require effort. But the effort shifts from resistance to engagement. You are no longer forcing yourself to do something that feels unnatural. You are simply doing something that is consistent with who you are. And this consistency is what creates the sense of integrity. The sense that your internal self and your external actions are aligned. That you are not pretending, or performing, or trying to be someone you are not. You are simply being who you are, and the actions flow naturally from that. But this alignment does not happen automatically. It happens through repetition. Through choosing the behavior, again and again, until it becomes familiar. Until it becomes normal. Until it becomes you. And the repetition does not have to be perfect. You do not have to execute the behavior flawlessly every single time. You simply have to execute it more often than not. You have to create a pattern where the new behavior is more common than the old behavior. And over time, the pattern becomes the default. This is how habits form. This is how identity shifts. Not through sudden transformation, but through gradual reinforcement. Through small choices, repeated consistently, until they are no longer choices. They are simply what you do. And when you reach that point, the behavior is no longer something you have to think about. It is automatic. Not in the sense that it requires no awareness, but in the sense that it does not require deliberation. You do not have to convince yourself to do it. You just do it, because it is what people like you do. And people like you is not a fixed category. It is a category you are defining, through your actions. And every time you act in a way that is consistent with who you want to be, you are strengthening that definition. You are making it more real. Consistency is not about perfection. It is about frequency. It is about showing up, again and again, even when you do not feel like it. Even when the results are not visible. Even when no one is watching. And this kind of consistency builds something that cannot be built through occasional bursts of intense effort. It builds trust. Trust in yourself. Trust that when you say you are going to do something, you will follow through. Trust that you are capable of making a commitment and honoring it, even when it is inconvenient. And this trust is foundational. Because without it, every decision becomes a negotiation. Every commitment becomes tentative. You are never sure whether you will actually do the thing you said you would do, and so you hesitate. You second guess. You leave yourself escape routes, just in case. But when you have built trust through consistency, the hesitation decreases. The second guessing decreases. You know that when you commit to something, you will follow through, because you have evidence. You have a track record. And that track record becomes a source of confidence. Not confidence that you will never fail, but confidence that you will keep trying. That you will not give up at the first sign of difficulty. That you are the kind of person who persists, even when persistence is hard. And this confidence is not arrogance. It is not a belief that you are better than others, or that you are immune to failure. It is simply a belief that you are capable, that you have agency, that your actions matter, and that you can shape your life through those actions. And this belief, once established, changes everything. Because it removes the sense of helplessness. The sense that you are at the mercy of circumstance, or luck, or forces beyond your control. You recognize that while you cannot control everything, you can control your response. And your response, repeated over time, shapes your life more than any single external event. This is not a motivational claim. It is an observation. And the observation is backed by experience. Not just the experience of others, but your own experience. Because you have already done this in some areas of your life. You have already built trust through consistency. You have already created change through small, repeated actions. And what you have done in one area, you can do in another. The process is the same. The only difference is the domain. But the difficulty is that consistency requires discipline. And discipline, in the cultural imagination, is often portrayed as something harsh. Something rigid. Something that requires deprivation and force and constant self-denial. But this is not what discipline is. Discipline is not punishment. It is structure. It is the framework that allows you to act in accordance with your intentions, rather than in accordance with your impulses. And impulses are not inherently bad. They are simply immediate. They respond to what feels good right now, without considering what will feel good later. And sometimes, what feels good right now is aligned with your long-term intentions. But often, it is not. And when it is not, discipline is what allows you to choose the action that serves your future self, rather than the action that serves your present self. Not because your present self is unimportant, but because your future self is also you. And that version of you deserves consideration. This is not about self-denial. It is about self-respect. It is about recognizing that you are not just the person you are in this moment. You are also the person you will be tomorrow, and next week, and next year. And the choices you make now will shape that person. And when you approach discipline from this perspective, it becomes less about force and more about care. You are not forcing yourself to do something you do not want to do. You are caring for your future self by making choices now that will benefit that person later. And this reframe changes the relationship you have with discipline. It stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a gift. A gift you are giving yourself, by choosing the harder thing now in order to make the future easier. But this does not mean every discipline choice will feel good. Some of them will feel difficult. Some of them will require real effort. And in those moments, it helps to remember why you are doing this. What you are moving toward. Who you are becoming. Because the difficulty is temporary. But the benefits are cumulative. And every time you choose the disciplined action, you are reinforcing the identity of someone who is capable of discipline. Someone who does not just react to what feels good in the moment, but who considers the larger arc of their life and makes choices accordingly. And this identity, once established, makes future discipline choices easier. Not because the choices themselves become easier, but because you have evidence that you are capable of making them. And that evidence reduces the resistance. The new self does not emerge fully formed. It emerges through repetition. Through daily choices that are consistent with the direction you are moving. And these choices do not have to be large. They do not have to be dramatic. They simply have to be intentional. And intention is what separates a choice from a habit. A habit is something you do automatically, without thinking. A choice is something you do deliberately, with awareness. And when you are in the process of building a new identity, the choices need to be deliberate. They need to be conscious. Because consciousness is what allows you to notice when you are slipping back into old patterns, and to correct course before the slip becomes a relapse. Over time, the deliberate choices become habits. They become automatic. And when that happens, the new identity is no longer something you are trying to build. It is something you are living. And the maintenance becomes easier, because it is no longer maintenance. It is simply how you operate. But this transition from deliberate choice to automatic habit takes time. And during that time, there will be moments when the old patterns resurface. When the old identity tries to reassert itself. When you find yourself doing something that is inconsistent with who you are trying to become. And when this happens, the response is not to panic. It is not to conclude that you have failed, or that the process is not working. It is simply to notice. To observe, without judgment, that the old pattern emerged. And then to make the choice, in the next moment, to return to the new pattern. This is the practice. Not perfection, but correction. Not flawless execution, but consistent redirection. And the more you practice this, the shorter the lapses become. The quicker you notice. The faster you correct. And eventually, the lapses become rare. Not because you have eliminated the old patterns entirely, but because the new patterns have become stronger. They have become more familiar. They have become the default. And when that happens, you will not feel like you are constantly fighting against yourself. You will feel like you are simply being yourself. And the self you are being is the self you chose to become. There is a common belief that change requires motivation. That you need to feel inspired, or energized, or excited in order to make progress. And while motivation can be helpful, it is not reliable. Because motivation is a feeling. And feelings fluctuate. They come and go, depending on circumstances, mood, energy levels, 1,000 other variables. And if you are relying on motivation to drive your actions, you will only act when you feel motivated. And that will not be often enough to create lasting change. What creates lasting change is not motivation. It is commitment. Commitment is the decision to act regardless of how you feel. To show up, even when you do not want to. To do the thing, even when it is not convenient, or enjoyable, or easy. And commitment, unlike motivation, does not require a feeling. It requires a decision. And once the decision is made, the action follows. Not because you feel like it, but because you committed to it. And this distinction is crucial. Because it removes the dependency on external conditions. You are no longer waiting for the right mood, or the right moment, or the right level of energy. You are simply acting, because you said you would. And this kind of action builds momentum. Not the kind of momentum that comes from excitement, but the kind that comes from consistency. From showing up, day after day, regardless of how you feel. And that momentum, over time, becomes a force of its own. It becomes easier to continue than to stop. Not because continuing is effortless, but because stopping would break the pattern. And the pattern, by that point, has become part of your identity. It has become part of how you see yourself. And breaking it would feel like a betrayal of that identity. This is the power of consistency. It does not just build habits. It builds identity. An identity, once established, is self-reinforcing. Because people act in ways that are consistent with how they see themselves. And when you see yourself as someone who shows up, who follows through, who honors commitments, you will continue to act in ways that are consistent with that self-image. Not perfectly, but consistently. And consistency is what matters. The daily choices you make are not separate from the larger arc of your life. They are the building blocks of that arc. They are the material from which the larger structure is constructed. And when you pay attention to those choices, when you make them intentionally, you are shaping the structure itself. But most people do not approach daily choices this way. They approach them as isolated events. As moments that do not matter in the larger scheme of things. And in one sense, they are right. No single choice, on its own, determines the trajectory of your life. But the pattern of choices does. And the pattern is built one choice at a time. And if you are making choices unconsciously, if you are simply reacting to whatever feels easiest in the moment, then the pattern that emerges is not one you designed. It is one that happened to you. But if you make choices consciously, if you consider each choice in the context of who you are trying to become, then the pattern that emerges is one you created. It is one that reflects your intentions, your values, your priorities. And this difference, between a pattern that happened to you and a pattern that you created, is the difference between a life that feels like it is happening to you and a life that feels like you are living it. And this sense of agency, this sense that you are the one steering, is one of the most valuable aspects of intentional daily choices. Because it removes the feeling of powerlessness. The feeling that your life is being shaped by forces beyond your control, and that all you can do is react. You recognize that while you cannot control everything, you can control how you respond. And your response, repeated consistently, shapes your life more than any single external circumstance. This does not mean external circumstances do not matter. They do. But they matter less than you think. Because what matters more is how you engage with those circumstances. How you interpret them. How you respond to them. And those things are within your control. And when you exercise that control, when you make choices that are aligned with who you want to be, you begin to see that your life is not fixed. It is not determined by your past, or by your circumstances, or by the expectations of others. It is being shaped, moment by moment, by the choices you are making. And that realization is both liberating and sobering. Liberating because it means you have more power than you thought. Sobering because it means you are responsible for how you use that power. And responsibility is not always comfortable. It would be easier to believe that your life is shaped by forces beyond your control. That you are simply doing the best you can with the hand you were dealt. And while there is some truth to that, it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you have agency. Not unlimited agency, but real agency. And that agency is exercised through the daily choices you make. The small, seemingly insignificant decisions that add up, over time, into the life you are living. And when you recognize this, you can no longer pretend that the life you have is the only life available to you. You can no longer pretend that you are stuck, or trapped, or without options. Because you have options. You always have options. They may not be easy options. They may not be comfortable options. But they exist. And the question is not whether you have options. The question is whether you are willing to exercise them. Whether you are willing to make the choices that will move you toward the person you want to be, even when those choices are difficult. Even when they require sacrifice. Even when they do not produce immediate results. Because the results are not immediate. They are cumulative. And cumulative results require patience. They require trust. They require the willingness to continue, even when the progress is not visible. But the progress is happening. It is happening in the small choices. In the daily actions. In the moments when you choose the harder thing, the more intentional thing, the thing that aligns with who you are becoming, rather than the thing that feels easiest in the moment. And those moments, individually, may not seem significant. But collectively, they are everything. They are the process through which you become the person you want to be. Not suddenly, but gradually. Not through dramatic transformation, but through small, consistent steps. And the steps do not stop. The process does not end. Because you are not trying to reach a final destination. You are trying to live in a way that feels true. And that is something you do every day, through the choices you make, the actions you take, the person you choose to be. And every day is an opportunity. An opportunity to continue. An opportunity to adjust. An opportunity to choose, again, to move in the direction that matters to you. Not perfectly. But intentionally. An intention, over time, is what builds a life that feels like yours. Chapter 5, Living Forward Without Looking Back. There comes a point in the process of change when you realize that the person you were is no longer the person you are. And this realization does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in a moment when you notice that something you used to struggle with no longer feels difficult. Or that a choice you used to agonize over now feels obvious. Or that a pattern you used to repeat has simply stopped repeating. And in that moment, you may feel a sense of relief. Not because you have arrived at some final destination, but because you can see that movement has occurred. That the small choices, the daily actions, the incremental adjustments have added up to something real. Something that was not visible while it was happening, but that is undeniable now that you are looking back at where you started. But looking back is not the same as living backward. And this distinction is important. Because while it can be useful to notice how far you have come, it is not useful to remain focused on the distance. To spend your energy analyzing the past, comparing it to the present, justifying why you changed or defending the choices that brought you here. The past is not something you need to fight. It is not something you need to overcome or erase or apologize for. It is simply where you were. And where you were is not where you are now. And where you are now is not where you will be. And all of this is fine. All of this is simply the nature of moving through time as a person who is capable of growth. But many people do not approach the past this way. They approach it as something that needs to be resolved. As something that holds power over them, that defines them, that must be reckoned with before they can move forward. And this belief, though it feels true, is actually a trap. Because it keeps you tethered to what was, rather than allowing you to engage fully with what is. And what is always where the work happens. The past is fixed. It cannot be changed. It can be reinterpreted, reframed, understood differently, but the events themselves are done. They are over. And no amount of analysis, or regret, or justification will alter them. What can be altered is your relationship to them. And altering that relationship does not require fighting. It requires acceptance. Not acceptance in the sense of approval, but acceptance in the sense of acknowledgement. Yes, that happened. Yes, I was that person. Yes, I made those choices. And now I am here. And here is where I am choosing to focus. This kind of acceptance is not passive. It is not resignation. It is an active decision to stop letting the past consume energy that could be directed toward the present. To stop rehearsing old narratives, old grievances, old versions of yourself that no longer exist except in memory. And memory, while it can be instructive, is not objective. It is selective. It emphasizes certain details and minimizes others. It constructs a story that feels coherent, but that may not reflect the full complexity of what actually happened. And when you remain focused on that story, you are not engaging with reality. You are engaging with a narrative. And narratives, once established, are difficult to revise. But revision is not the goal. The goal is to stop needing the narrative to be anything other than what it is. To stop needing the past to have been different in order for the present to be acceptable. To recognize that the past, whatever it was, brought you here. And here is where you have the opportunity to choose what comes next. And that choice is not dependent on resolving the past. It is not dependent on making peace with every mistake, or understanding every decision, or forgiving every hurt. It is simply dependent on your willingness to turn your attention forward. To stop looking back for answers that are not there, and to start looking at what is in front of you. Because what is in front of you is the only place where action is possible. The past is not available for revision. The future is not available for certainty. But the present is available. And the present is where everything happens. This does not mean you ignore the past. It means you stop living in it. You stop using it as the primary lens through which you interpret everything that is happening now. You acknowledge it, you learn from it where learning is possible, and then you release it. Not dramatically, but simply. By choosing to focus your attention elsewhere. And this redirection of attention is one of the most powerful aspects of moving forward. Because attention is energy. And wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. And if your attention is constantly directed backward, toward what was, then your energy is not available for what is. It is locked in the past, replaying scenes that cannot be changed, analyzing decisions that have already been made, imagining alternate versions of events that never occurred. And this is exhausting. Not in a way that feels dramatic, but in a way that feels like a low-grade drain. A constant background hum of mental activity that never quite resolves into anything useful, but that prevents you from being fully present in the moment you are actually living. Over time, it becomes clear that this kind of backward focus is not about the past at all. It is about avoiding the present. Because the present requires engagement. It requires decision. It requires the risk of making a choice that might not work out. And it is easier, in some ways, to stay focused on what has already happened, because what has already happened is known. It is safe, in the sense that it cannot hurt you anymore. It has already hurt you, or it has already helped you, and either way, it is finished. But the present is not finished. It is unfolding. And unfolding requires participation. It requires you to show up, to pay attention, to make choices without knowing how they will turn out. And this uncertainty can feel more uncomfortable than the certainty of the past, even when the past was painful. And so people retreat. They retreat into memory, into analysis, into the safety of what is already known. And in doing so, they miss what is happening now. They miss the opportunities that are available now. They miss the person they are becoming now, because they are too focused on the person they were. But the person they were is gone. Not in the sense that the past did not happen, but in the sense that the person who lived that past is no longer the person living this present. You have changed. You have learned. You have adjusted. And the version of you that exists now is not the same version that made those old choices, or experienced those old events, or lived in those old circumstances. And recognizing this is not about denying continuity. You are still you. But you are not static. You are a process, not a fixed point. And the process has moved. And if you are going to engage with where the process is now, you have to stop insisting that it should still be where it was then. This is often where people lose control, without realizing it. Not because they are stuck in the past, but because they are using the past as a justification for staying where they are. They tell themselves that because things were a certain way before, they must continue to be that way now. That because they made certain choices before, they must defend those choices now. That because they presented themselves a certain way before, they must maintain that presentation now, even when it no longer fits. And this insistence on continuity, on consistency, on not contradicting the past, becomes a prison. Because it prevents adaptation. It prevents growth. It prevents the natural evolution that should occur when a person moves through time and accumulates experience. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to choose differently. You are allowed to be someone now who would not have made the same choices you made then. And this is not betrayal. It is not inconsistency. It is growth. It is the recognition that who you were then was operating with the information, the understanding, the circumstances available at that time. And now you have different information, different understanding, different circumstances. And it would be strange if you did not respond to that difference by adjusting. But adjustment is uncomfortable. Because it requires admitting that the past, while it may have been the best you could do at the time, is not the standard you are holding yourself to now. And this admission can feel like criticism. Like you are looking back at your younger self and judging that person for not knowing what you know now. But this is not judgment. It is perspective. And perspective is not the same as condemnation. You can acknowledge that you did the best you could with what you had, and also acknowledge that what you have now allows you to do better. These two things are not in conflict. They are simply two different points on the same continuum. And the continuum does not stop. It continues. And if you are going to continue with it, you have to be willing to let go of the need to justify every previous point. To let go of the need to make the past make sense in a way that absolves you of responsibility, or that proves you were always right, or that frames every choice as inevitable. Because the past was not inevitable. It was contingent. It was shaped by circumstances, by choices, by chance. And the present is also contingent. And the future will be as well. And this contingency is not a problem. It is simply the nature of reality. And when you accept it, you stop needing the past to be anything other than what it was. And that acceptance frees you to focus on what comes next. When you begin to move in a new direction, there is often a pressure to explain yourself, to justify the change, to provide a narrative that makes sense to others, that reassures them that you are not being reckless, or impulsive, or foolish. That you have thought this through, that you have good reasons, that you are not just abandoning everything you have built for no reason. And this pressure can feel overwhelming. Because the truth is, the reasons for change are often not clean. They are not always articulable. They do not always fit into a narrative that feels satisfying or complete. Sometimes, the reason is simply that something no longer feels right. That the life you have been living, while it may have worked before, is not working now. And you cannot always explain why. You just know. But I just know is not an explanation that satisfies most people. They want details. They want logic. They want reassurance that you are making a good decision. And when you cannot provide that reassurance, they become concerned, or critical, or dismissive. And their reaction, while it may be rooted in care, is not actually about you. It is about them. About their discomfort with uncertainty. About their need for your life to make sense to them, because if your life does not make sense, it raises questions about whether their life makes sense. And those questions are uncomfortable. So they push back. They ask questions that are designed to make you doubt. They point out risks. They remind you of what you are leaving behind. They suggest that you are overreacting, or going through a phase, or not thinking clearly. And if you are not grounded in your own clarity, this pushback can be destabilizing. It can make you question whether the shift you are feeling is real, or whether it is just confusion. Whether the direction you are moving in is right, or whether you are making a mistake. But the pushback is not evidence that you are wrong. It is evidence that others are uncomfortable with your change. And their discomfort, while real, is not your responsibility to resolve. You are not required to make your life legible to others. You are not required to provide a narrative that satisfies their need for coherence. You are only required to be honest with yourself. To pay attention to what feels true. To notice when something is no longer working, and to adjust accordingly. And if that adjustment does not make sense to others, that is fine. They are not living your life. You are. And this boundary, between your life and their interpretation of your life, is essential. Because without it, you will spend your energy managing their reactions rather than living your own experience. You will make choices based on what will cause the least disruption, what will require the least explanation, what will allow you to avoid conflict or criticism. And choices made from that place are not free choices. They are reactive choices. They are choices designed to maintain external approval, rather than internal alignment. And over time, those choices accumulate into a life that looks acceptable from the outside but feels hollow from the inside. And the hollowness is not something you can ignore forever. Eventually, it demands attention. Eventually, you have to choose: do you continue living for the approval of others, or do you start living for yourself? And living for yourself does not mean disregarding others. It does not mean acting without consideration for how your choices affect the people around you. It means that their approval is no longer the primary factor in your decisions. It is one factor among many. And it is not the most important one. The most important factor is whether the choice aligns with who you are trying to be. Whether it moves you closer to the kind of life you want to live. Whether it feels true, even if it is difficult, even if it does not make sense to anyone else. And when you make choices from this place, the need to defend them decreases. Because you are not asking for permission. You are not asking for validation. You are simply acting in accordance with your own clarity. And that clarity is its own justification. This does not mean you will never doubt. Doubt is part of the process. But the doubt is different when it comes from within, rather than from external pressure. Internal doubt is a question. It is your mind checking in, asking, is this still right? Do I need to adjust? And that question is useful. It keeps you honest. It prevents you from moving forward on autopilot, without paying attention to whether the direction still feels aligned. But external doubt is not a question. It is a statement. It is other people telling you, often indirectly, that your choice does not make sense to them. And their statement, while it may be well-intentioned, is not useful. Because it is not based on your experience. It is based on their interpretation of your experience. And their interpretation is shaped by their own fears, their own limitations, their own need for your life to remain consistent with the role you have played in their life. And when you recognize this, you can receive their concern without absorbing it. You can acknowledge that they are uncomfortable, without allowing their discomfort to redirect your path. You can thank them for their input, and then return to your own clarity. And you can do this without conflict, without defensiveness, without needing to convince them that you are right. Because you do not need them to agree. You only need yourself to be clear. And clarity, once established, is remarkably resilient. It does not require external validation to remain stable. It only requires your continued attention. The need for external approval is one of the most persistent obstacles to living authentically. And it is persistent not because it is based on something real, but because it is wired deeply into how humans function. We are social creatures. We are designed to care what others think, to seek belonging, to avoid rejection. And these instincts are not wrong. They served a purpose, evolutionarily. They kept us safe, connected, included. But in the modern context, they often do more harm than good. Because the need for approval does not stop at ensuring basic social connection. It extends into every area of life. Into career choices, relationship choices, lifestyle choices, identity choices. And when approval becomes the primary driver, the life that results is not yours. It is a performance. A carefully managed presentation designed to meet the expectations of an audience that may not even be paying attention. And the cost of this performance is enormous. Not in a way that is immediately visible, but in a way that accumulates over time. You make small compromises. You suppress small truths. You adjust small behaviors. And each adjustment, on its own, seems minor. But collectively, they add up to a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. And at some point, you may wake up and realize that you do not recognize the person you have become. Not because you have changed in some dramatic way, but because you have spent so long performing a version of yourself that was designed to be acceptable, that the real version, the version that exists beneath the performance, has been buried. And excavating that version is not easy. Because it requires dismantling the performance. And the performance, by that point, is what people recognize. It is what they expect. And when you stop performing, they notice. And they react. And their reaction can feel like rejection. But it is not rejection of you. It is rejection of the change. It is discomfort with the unfamiliar. And while their discomfort is real, it is not a reason to stop. It is simply information. Information that tells you that the people around you have become accustomed to the performance, and that they will need time to adjust to the person beneath it. And some of them will adjust. They will see that the change, while unfamiliar, is not threatening. That you are still you, just more honest. More aligned. More present. And they will appreciate that, even if it takes time. But some of them will not adjust. They will continue to expect the performance. And when you do not provide it, they will withdraw. And this withdrawal can be painful. Because it reveals that the connection was not based on who you are, but on the role you were playing. And losing that connection, even when it was based on something false, still feels like loss. But the loss is necessary. Because continuing to maintain connections that require you to perform is not sustainable. It drains you. It prevents you from living authentically. And over time, it creates resentment. Resentment toward the people who expect the performance, and resentment toward yourself for continuing to provide it. And when you release those connections, when you allow them to fall away, you create space. Space for connections that are based on who you actually are. Connections that do not require performance, or pretense, or careful management. Connections that feel easy, because they are rooted in honesty. And these connections, while they may be fewer, are deeper. They are more satisfying. They are more real. And they do not require you to abandon yourself in order to maintain them. This is what it means to live forward without needing external approval. It means recognizing that the people who matter will stay, and the people who do not stay did not matter in the way you thought they did. It means trusting that you are better off with fewer, deeper connections than with many shallow ones. It means accepting that not everyone will understand your choices, and that this is fine. Their understanding is not required. What is required is your own clarity. Your own commitment to living in a way that feels true. And when you have that, the opinions of others become background noise. Not irrelevant, but not determinative. You can hear them, consider them, and then return to your own center. And your center is strong enough to hold, even when others are pulling in different directions. Transformation, when it is real, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not require validation, or recognition, or applause. It simply happens, quietly, through the accumulation of small choices that are consistent with the direction you have chosen. And for a long time, the transformation is invisible. Not just to others, but to yourself. You do not feel different. You do not look different. The changes are too subtle, too incremental to register as significant. And there may be moments when you wonder whether anything is actually changing, or whether you are simply going through motions that are not producing any real results. But the results are there. They are just not visible yet. Because transformation does not happen on the surface. It happens underneath. It happens in the patterns that are being rewired, in the habits that are being reshaped, in the identity that is being reconstructed. And all of that internal work takes time before it becomes visible externally. And when it does become visible, it does not arrive as a sudden revelation. It arrives as a quiet recognition. A moment when you notice that something you used to struggle with is no longer a struggle. That a choice you used to agonize over now feels simple. That a pattern you used to repeat has stopped repeating, without you even noticing when it stopped. And in that moment, you realize that the transformation has already occurred. Not in the way you imagined it would, not with the drama or the clarity you expected, but in a way that is more subtle and more durable. Because it was not forced. It was not performed. It simply emerged, through consistent engagement with the process. And this kind of transformation, because it is quiet, is often overlooked. By others, and sometimes by yourself. There is no clear before and after. There is no moment you can point to and say, this is when everything changed. There is just a gradual shift, so gradual that it is only visible when you look back at where you started and compare it to where you are now. And the distance between those 2 points is significant. But it was not crossed in a single leap. It was crossed in small steps, taken daily, without fanfare, without recognition, without external validation. Just quiet, consistent movement in a direction that mattered to you. And this is the nature of real change. It is not spectacular. It is not dramatic. It is simply persistent. And persistence, over time, is what creates the life you want to live. But persistence requires patience. And patience is one of the most difficult qualities to cultivate, because it requires you to trust a process that does not provide immediate feedback. You have to continue moving forward without knowing, in the moment, whether the movement is producing results. You have to act on faith. Not blind faith, but earned faith. Faith that is based on the understanding that small actions, repeated consistently, accumulate into something larger. And this faith is not easy to maintain. Because there will be moments when you question whether the process is working. Moments when you feel like you are not making progress, like you are stuck, like nothing is changing. And in those moments, the temptation is to abandon the process. To conclude that it is not working, and to search for something else. Something faster, something more dramatic, something that will produce visible results immediately. But this temptation is a trap. Because the process is working. It is just working slowly. And slow is not the same as ineffective. It is simply a different timeline than the one you were hoping for. And if you abandon the process every time it feels slow, you will never experience the results. Because the results require time. They require accumulation. They require the small actions to compound, over weeks and months and years, into something that is undeniable. And when you reach that point, when the transformation has become undeniable, you will not feel the need to announce it. You will not feel the need to defend it, or explain it, or justify it. It will simply be who you are. And who you are will be evident in how you move through the world, in the choices you make, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the presence you bring to your interactions. And this presence, this quiet confidence, is not something you can fake. It is not something you can perform. It is the natural result of having done the work. Of having made the choices. Of having shown up, consistently, even when it was difficult, even when no one was watching, even when the results were not visible. And the work is never finished. Because you are never finished. You are always becoming. Always adjusting. Always refining. And the process of becoming is not something you complete. It is something you engage with, for as long as you are alive. And engaging with it does not require intensity. It does not require constant effort. It simply requires attention. Attention to what feels aligned and what does not. Attention to when you are living in accordance with your values and when you are not. Attention to the small choices that shape your days, and through them, your life. And this attention, sustained over time, is what creates a life that feels true. Not perfect, but true. Not without difficulty, but without pretense. Not without doubt, but without the need for external validation to confirm that you are on the right path. Because the path is not something that exists outside of you, waiting to be found. It is something you create, through the choices you make. And as long as you are making choices that feel aligned, you are on the path. And the path continues, as long as you continue. And continuing is not about reaching a destination. It is about living in a way that feels consistent with who you are. And who you are is not fixed. It is evolving. And the evolution is not something to resist, or control, or finalize. It is something to allow. Something to participate in. Something to trust. And trust, in this context, is not about believing that everything will work out the way you hope. It is about believing that you are capable of navigating whatever comes. That you have the tools, the awareness, the resilience to adjust when things do not go as planned. That you are not fragile, or helpless, or dependent on circumstances being exactly right in order to be okay. You are okay now. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are engaged. Because you are paying attention. Because you are making choices that reflect what matters to you. And that engagement, that attention, that intention is what creates a life that feels worth living. Not a life that looks impressive from the outside, but a life that feels meaningful from the inside. And meaning is not something that can be seen. It can only be felt. And when you feel it, you know. You know that you are living forward. That you are not stuck in the past, or paralyzed by the future, but present in the moment that is actually available to you. And that moment is always now. And now is always enough. The question that surfaces, after you have been moving forward for some time, is not whether you are making progress. You can see that you are. The question is whether you trust the process enough to continue, even when the path ahead is unclear. Even when the results are not yet visible. Even when others are questioning your direction, or when you are questioning it yourself. And this question is not answered once. It is answered repeatedly, in small moments, through small choices. Each time you choose to continue, you are answering it. Each time you choose consistency over convenience, intention over impulse, you are reaffirming your commitment to the process. And the process does not promise certainty. It does not promise that everything will work out exactly as you hope. It only promises that you will be different at the end than you were at the beginning. That you will have learned something, discovered something, become something that was not available to you before you started. And that, in itself, is valuable. Not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it guarantees movement. And movement, in any intentional direction, is better than remaining static in a place that no longer serves you. You may begin to notice that the discomfort you felt at the beginning, the discomfort of uncertainty, of unfamiliarity, of not knowing whether you were making the right choice, has shifted. It has not disappeared entirely, but it has become more tolerable. Not because the uncertainty has decreased, but because your relationship to uncertainty has changed. You no longer need to know exactly where you are going in order to take the next step. You no longer need to see the entire path in order to trust that the path exists. You have learned, through experience, that clarity often comes after action, not before it. That you do not always know what the right choice is until you have made it and observed the results. And this willingness to act without complete information is one of the most important shifts that occurs during the process of transformation. Because complete information does not exist. There is always something you do not know. Always some variable you cannot predict. Always some outcome you cannot foresee. And if you wait until you have complete information, you will never act. You will remain in analysis, in preparation, in the endless loop of trying to figure everything out before you begin. And that loop is comfortable, in a way. It feels productive. It feels like you are doing something. But you are not doing anything. You are simply avoiding the discomfort of taking action without certainty. And certainty, as it turns out, is overrated. What matters more than certainty is responsiveness. The ability to act, observe, adjust. To make a choice, see what happens, and then make the next choice based on what you learned from the first one. This kind of responsiveness requires you to stay present. To pay attention to what is actually happening, rather than what you thought would happen, or what you hoped would happen. And this attention, this presence, is what allows you to navigate complexity without needing to control it. You cannot control everything. You cannot predict everything. You cannot plan for every possibility. But you can respond. And your ability to respond, skillfully and intentionally, is what determines the quality of your experience more than any external circumstance. And this responsiveness is not reactive. It is not impulsive. It is grounded in the clarity you have developed about who you want to be and what matters to you. And that clarity acts as a filter. It allows you to assess situations quickly, to determine what aligns and what does not, to make decisions that are consistent with your direction without needing to deliberate endlessly. This does not mean you never deliberate. It means the deliberation is focused. It is not about trying to figure out the perfect answer. It is about checking in with yourself, noticing what feels right, and then acting on that feeling, even if you cannot articulate exactly why it feels right. Because sometimes, the knowing is deeper than words. It is intuitive, embodied, felt. And when you have been engaged in the process of intentional change for long enough, you begin to trust that knowing. You begin to recognize it as valid, even when it does not come with a logical explanation. And this trust in your own knowing is one of the most liberating aspects of the process. Because it means you are no longer dependent on external validation to confirm that you are making the right choice. You have an internal compass now. And that compass, while it may not always point you toward the easiest path, will point you toward the path that is most aligned with who you are. And alignment, over time, becomes its own form of validation. Not validation from others, but validation from yourself. The sense that you are living in a way that feels true, even when it is difficult, even when it does not produce immediate results, even when no one else understands. And that sense is enough. It is more than enough. It is what sustains you when external circumstances are challenging, when progress feels slow, when doubt creeps in. Because you know, at a level deeper than thought, that you are moving in the right direction. Not because someone told you so, but because you can feel it. And feeling it is not the same as being certain. Feeling it is something quieter, something more subtle. It is the absence of the internal friction that was present before. The absence of the sense that you are living against yourself, that your actions and your values are misaligned, that you are performing a version of yourself that is not true. When that friction decreases, when the alignment increases, there is a settling. A sense of coming home, not to a place, but to yourself. And that settling is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a rush of emotion or a sudden clarity. It simply is. It is the baseline from which you operate now. And it feels, more than anything, like relief. Relief that you no longer have to pretend. Relief that you no longer have to maintain a version of yourself that requires constant effort. Relief that you can simply be, without apology, without justification, without needing to make yourself acceptable to anyone other than yourself. And this relief is not the end of the process. It is simply a marker. A marker that tells you that something has shifted. That the work you have been doing has produced a result. And that the result, while it may not look the way you expected, is real. And real is all that matters. Not perfect, not complete, not finished. Just real. Just true. Just aligned with who you actually are, rather than who you thought you should be. And from this place, the next steps become clearer. Not because the future has revealed itself, but because you are more grounded in the present. And when you are grounded in the present, you do not need to see far ahead. You only need to see the next step. And the next step is always visible, if you are paying attention. So you take it. And then you take the next one. And the next one after that. And over time, the steps accumulate into a path. A path that is uniquely yours, that could not have been designed in advance, that only revealed itself through the act of walking it. And the walking continues. Not toward a destination that will finally complete you, but toward a life that feels worth living. A life that reflects what matters to you. A life that is shaped by your choices, not by circumstance, not by expectation, not by the need to be anyone other than who you are. And who you are is enough. Not because you have achieved everything, not because you have figured everything out, not because you are without flaw or doubt or difficulty. But because you are here. You are present. You are engaged. And you are living forward, without looking back, without needing permission, without waiting for the perfect moment. The moment is now. It has always been now. And now is where everything happens.